Hey guys, welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. My special guest today is a political activist, and he's running for Congress for Alabama's District 2. Hi, Terell.
How are you doing?
Doing well. So, Terell, before I dive into your campaign, can you tell everyone a little bit about your background and why you decided to run for office?
Yes, well, I'm from Montgomery, Alabama, the city of the Civil Rights Movement, also the capital of the state. I was born and raised here in Montgomery on what we call the west side of Montgomery, which is heavily and predominantly Black. And also, I was raised in what they would like to call the ghetto. I was raised in a single parent household for most of my youth until I was like around 16 when my mom remarried. I was the first in my family to graduate high school. Out of my mom's generations, brothers and sisters, I was the first kid of the brothers of any of my mom's brothers and sisters and herself to graduate high school. I went to college, but I didn't finish because it was too expensive. They wanted me to pay $2,000 a month, and I was working at Wendy's, and I couldn't afford that on a minimum wage. I'm a Black Lives Matter advocate. I'm an LGBT rights advocate. I'm a climate advocate. And I decided to run for Congress because I didn't see enough representation for people like myself, millennial and the Generation Z generation. Is mostly here in Alabama. When we get Democrats or somebody to run, they're very moderate. And for me, it was the sense of if I don't see change how it should be done now, then I have to get up and take on the mantle and try to make change myself. Yeah. Because it's the moderate, I have no problem with moderate Democrats, but in the society and in the world we live in today, we have to put people first. And when it comes to human rights or certain issues that are human rights issues and issues that make sense, there shouldn't be a moderate or bipartisan stance on things like that. And for me, if I'm not seeing it and I'm not seeing anybody else taking on the mantle or taking on the establishment to address these issues, I felt like if nobody else was going to do it, maybe I should take on the mantle and do this.
Awesome. No, I agree 100%. I noticed on your website, you mentioned that only certain areas in Montgomery can vote for you. Can you explain to everyone, why is that?
Okay, so in District 2, we have 15 counties. Every county, we have the whole counties except for Montgomery. And Montgomery is the most predominantly Black county we have in this district. Every other county, we have the counties in its entirety, except for Montgomery. And in Montgomery, they cut out like the west side of Montgomery, which is heavily Black or heavily Black side of town. And they cut out most of the east side of Montgomery, which is more predominantly white. And so it's like when Montgomery is like cut up in a thin line like this. And for me, it was gerrymandering because in 2010, we had a Democratic representative, but after 2010, they gerrymandered the state and they also removed an entire county from the district, which was another predominantly Black district. So for me, it was not for me, but for the whole county, it was me. I honestly believe that it was intentional for Republicans to cut out all of these Black voters. And not only that, years prior, they closed over 70, over, I think it was 170 DMVs in mostly predominantly Black area, make it harder for people in Black rural areas to get an ID to register to vote and everything else.
Mm,
So it's
wow.
like in my city, like my mom, she stays on one street in this city, but from this street is not in my district and on down, and it's so weird.
Wow. Yeah, gerrymandering is still a real issue. I want to talk about some of the issues that are on your platform. So I saw criminal justice reform, and one of the items is bail reform. Now, this is important because a lot of people don't talk about the bail issue with the criminal justice system. How would you like to change cash bail?
Oh, well, for me, there's another implement system in place, but I cannot remember the name because I'm a little nervous right now. Um, but for me, well, one thing with cash bail is that it preys on those in poverty. It preys on those that aren't wealthy. If you can't afford to pay bail, they make you sit in jail. Some people sit in jail for months or years because they weren't able to pay bail. Even if they aren't convicted of a crime, they have to sit in jail for months or years just for a trial date. Even in some cases where they were found not guilty, they still had to end up sitting in jail for years and years amounts of time. And I think that's something that we need to look at as a people and as a nation to reform bail, because that just seems that seems like an unfair practice, as well as seems like a attack on poverty.
Yep.
And we
Yes.
have to come together and figure out a way to find a better system that isn't biased.
Yes. No, I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of people don't realize this, that you have a good portion of people that are in jail that they may not even be guilty. They can't afford the cash bail. And so they
Exactly.
just sit there.
Exactly. And that's just and for one, it's more prominent amongst Black residents or Black citizens of this country. And Alabama has more of the highest incarceration rates per 100 people. Then they have more than the nation combined.
Yep.
And
Yeah,
that's ridiculous, especially when it comes to people who are in jail because of not being able to pay a cash bond. There has to be something we can do to look at that system and change it.
agreed. So another issue on your platform is economic empowerment. What are some of the economic issues that you see in your district?
Well, in my district, there are a lot of underfunded communities that are just wasting away. There are many buildings that have been abandoned, communities where homes that have been falling apart have been abandoned. Um, for me, I feel like we need to invest more into our communities for one. Um, we need to, of course, raise wages, because it makes no sense that people are working for less than a living wage, especially here in Alabama. And then my thing is, most people don't take into account when they're talking about raising wages, the effects of everything else, as they think that, oh, you make enough for this and that, but they don't account for all of the other bills people have to pay. On top of rent, you have utilities. If you have kids, those kids cost money. And if you have a car, there's a car insurance or your healthcare bills. Nobody takes into account all of the things that they asking us to pay for when
Mhm.
waiting $7.25 an hour.
Right. I noticed, like you mentioned on your website, inflation too, in reference to raises. And that's really important because I know when I was growing up, my mom was able to stay at home with me until I went to kindergarten. And
Mhm.
so we were fine just on one income. And then when I went to kindergarten, then my mom went back to work. But today, like for our generation, I don't know anyone that can do that. Like everybody I know is like, it has to be two incomes. Like all of my friends, I don't know anyone who's like a stay at home mom.
Yes, and especially here in Alabama, where we have um, a lot of single mothers in especially in District 2. We have a lot of single parent households, and most of them are predominantly Black, where they are making less than a living wage and they have to take care of these kids and everything themselves. And it's a high rate, especially here in District 2. And raising a wage is something, it's for me, it's not something that should be bipartisan.
Right.
For me, Americans love to say families first, but what are you doing to protect these families? And and then they worry about community, but parents have to work long hours or two jobs, and people can't afford childcare. Then what do you expect from a country? What do you expect from the youth in this country if their parents have to continue to work long hours or work double jobs to keep food on the table, clothes on their back, a roof over their heads? And I mean, for me, it's like, what do you expect the kids to do? And what do you expect these other influences from kids? Well, the influences that kids see when the parents have to work double shifts or two jobs in order to try to keep their kids alive, basically.
Right. And then you have kids at home by themselves, without like
Exactly.
the parent like supervision and all of that stuff, and nothing really to keep them like motivated or out of trouble. So that's definitely an issue. And speaking of that, another issue on your platform is expanding public education. One of the things that really jumped out for me with this one is you want to incorporate financial literacy studies in high school. So when I saw this, I was like, yes, absolutely. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, that's a very important issue for me. So when it comes to high school, I feel like public schools should at least teach financial literacy and business. When we have parents that's working double jobs or double shifts or working long hours and not able to spend much time with their kids. Like for me myself, after high school, I didn't have any knowledge of finances or the financial world outside of high school. I really didn't have any much life experience or what I was supposed to expect after high school. And for me, it's like I wish I would have learned something about finances and financial literacy in high school. And for me, incorporating financial literacy studies in high school will prepare kids graduating high school for life outside of high school, especially if you're going to go to college. Or it also can help incentivize young people to start businesses. And like here in my city, there's a lot of, especially millennials and Generation Zers, and I know a lot of young people, and I mean young people that have businesses, and some of them have good, successful businesses. They didn't go to college, but their businesses are really taking off. And I applaud that, especially for Generation Z, because there are a lot of those in Generation Z here in Montgomery that have their own businesses and that are doing very well. And for me, it's like, for me, I wish that I don't say I wish, I'm hoping to someday influence this country or influence leaders and be part of that leadership to mandate financial literacy studies in school, because that's something that's not being taught to kids. When you graduate high school, these finances prepare people for the real world. That's why we don't have so many young people going into credit card debt, or I mean, well, if student, I can't say student loan debt because I'm hoping to cancel that. We hoping we have free tuition free public college.
Hmm. Yeah. No, I know it's one of those things again where a lot of people, and I work in education, so in higher education, and one of the things I've noticed is you have a lot of people coming to college. They haven't been taught about credit. They don't know, but
Mhm.
like you shouldn't have to go to college to learn about finances and to take finance courses.
Exactly.
Like you should, these are life skills. Like you should know about credit. You should know about simple things like leasing an apartment and what that requires and what that like entails. Like they don't teach those things in high school. They rather teach you about tools and things that you actually don't end up using in the real world. I noticed that.
Exactly. And also, I feel like those financial literacy study classes will help kids who are entering into college to learn more about financial aid and student loans. Because a lot of, especially for me, I had no real understanding of financial aid and student loans. Growing up in a Black community, we mostly heard parents say, fill out a FAFSA, they're going to help you go to college, it'll help you pay for college. But nobody was telling us about, paying that back later and everything. You have to wait till you get to college to find that.
Mhm.
And then by then you're in mountains of student loan debt. Myself, I'm in student loan debt. And I couldn't even finish college because I had 9 months left before I completed, but then they raised the prices of tuition and housing, and I was to pay $2,000 a month, but I couldn't do that working at a fast food restaurant making $7.25 an hour.
Right. I mean, the student loan debt, and that's another thing when we think about the economy right now. If we got rid of student loan debt, that would
Mhm.
really help the economy right now.
It really would. It will help a lot of young people who are in student loan debt. It'll help build their credit, and it also will help them. I feel like it will help them start businesses. They'll be able to get loans and do something better with their money, because paying back student loans now is taking a lot from people, especially when you're working at these jobs that paying minimum wage, and you have to pay back student loans, you have to pay rent, you have to pay bills, and pay on healthcare. I feel like canceling that student debt will help a lot of people out a lot more.
Yeah. And that's also one of the reasons why a lot of people like graduating from college right now, a lot of like boomers say like, oh, they're not buying homes and they're not like getting married and they're not having kids. And I'm like, because they're in debt.
Yes, and we can't afford any of that. We can't afford any of that.
No, not at all. I want to get your opinion about the Biden administration, like how you feel about them right now, especially in reference to student loans, because I know that came up recently. How do you feel about the Biden administration right now and how they're doing in office?
If I was to grade the Biden administration, it would be a C. They're doing okay, but for me, they have to do more. It's like I said, this is a different generation. This is a different time. We have had presidents before that made big changes to the company. FDR with the New Deal, although that New Deal that excluded Black people, it still was able to create more infrastructure in America and create jobs. And when I say we look around America today, all these commercial buildings, all the properties we have now, that was thanks to FDR, but at the same time, that was a racist deal. And then come Reagan, and he changed America once again. It's like economic system change in America after FDR. It changed again after Ronald Reagan. I think it's about time that we change that again. And this is why I'm advocating for things for people, because for so long, these racist past politicians have left out so many people in America, and it is now about time that we include everyone. So Medicare for all is something that should be passed. Putting money back into Black and Brown communities, better education, because it's for me is it's time for a new America. We can't keep doing the same old. And for me, with the Biden administration, I feel like they're not seeing that. They're not seeing young people. And today, a lot of young people are now rising up, speaking out, going out to vote. A lot of young people are now getting involved, and they want real change. And I feel like they're being ignored, especially with the Biden administration.
Yeah, they're not a part of the same population. And this is one of those things I try to tell people is that the people that we have in that administration right now in office, and not talking about like people that came from grassroots, but the people in charge that we have in that administration right now, they are not a part of the same population that is experiencing these things.
Exactly.
Their kids are not going to have to worry about student loan debt. Like they're wealthy.
Exactly. It's like they are in a bubble. And for me, and I know Biden likes to talk about growing up in the middle class life, in his middle class, then he like to talk about some middle class struggle. But for me, whenever Biden talks about his middle class life, I don't want to hear it, because at the same time, Biden was raised during the middle class. When Biden was in the middle class in his youth, that was the time where Black people were not allowed in the middle class. That was the time when Black people were not to even set foot in the middle class without even being threats of being murdered or anything, or being arrested or anything. So that's a whole generation of people, or not just Black people, all BIPOC people. They were not allowed in these communities. So whenever Biden goes to talk about him being raised up middle class and some of the struggles of his middle class life, I don't care, because Black people were not included in the time where you was being brought up in the middle class.
That's 100% true. And also Black people's struggle during that time was a lot more difficult than what
Exactly.
Joe Biden experienced. I mean, like you said, like Black people weren't allowed in that community.
Exactly. And for me, whenever he talks about the middle class, I just turn it off.
No, I definitely hear you. I have two more questions for you. The first one is, when you look back on Barack Obama's legacy as a president, how do you feel about that?
I feel like he's just Joe Biden. I don't give I didn't see any benefits. No Black community saw any benefits. No other communities of color saw any benefit. For me, I feel like Barack Obama, he governed for the corporate class. He governed for the rich. He's governed for the wealthy. And during his time, there was a stimulus payment that went out, but it didn't go out to the people. It went out to corporations and billionaires and millionaires to bail them out after they played around with people's money. They lost people's money. They lost people. They ended up having people losing their homes. They played around with the money of the citizens of this country, but the country bailed them out instead of the citizens who were affected by Wall Street's greed.
Yep. That's one of the things that a lot of people don't talk about this. And I think a lot of people don't know about it either. But under Obama's presidency, the racial wealth gap between Black people and white people in this country actually increased.
Exactly.
So Black wealth actually went down under Barack Obama. So when people say to me like, well, no, you need to, thank him and praise him because he was the first Black president, I'm like, but what did he do?
Exactly. There's a lot of voters what people don't understand about voters in this country is that majority of the people who do vote, there are some of us that are politically informed, but majority of the people who do go and vote, they're not following behind policies. They're following behind symbolism. They're following behind, they say this in the media, so it must be a good thing. That's what they're looking at. They're not looking at they're not exactly looking at the policies or what they do after they get in office. Because you get these politicians get on the news like Joe Biden. Healthcare is a human right. People fall for that, but he's not doing anything to implement that healthcare is a human right. Just the speech he gave at Congress saying something about lowering prescription drug costs, but what leverage does the government have over pharmaceutical companies to do that? There's nothing there's no leverage right now on the table for it. So right now you're just speaking platitudes.
Exactly, I agree. All right, Terell, one more question for you. How can people help support your campaign?
Well, supporting my campaign, sharing, retweeting, following me, or going to my website, terrellforchange.com, and making a donation. That's Terell with the number 4, change.com.
Awesome. All right, everyone, I'll be sure to put Terell's website link in the description below. Terell, thanks so much for coming on. This was awesome.
Thank you. It was lovely, and it was lovely to meet you, and I enjoyed this interview.